as a sudden outpouring of affection, love, or understanding for the United States. We should not interpret this as the foundation for Anglo-Saxon democracy. The sheiks are calling the tune. We have been living in this very fictitious world where we have been encouraged to look at anyone who doesn't immediately agree with us or shares a different viewpoint or has interests that don't necessarily coincide with us in all cases as an enemy. And today we're looking at the Russians as though they're enemies, which is absurd. There's absolutely no reason why the United States and Russia should not be on excellent terms. But Putin apparently is not sufficiently democratic. Americans tend to see the world in terms of personalities. Is Putin good or is Putin bad? Putin is irrelevant. He represents Russia, 130 million Russians. He represents 1,000 years of Russian culture and history. We have tended to personalize these things and trivialize international relations on the assumption that someone's personal relationship is going to make any damn difference to how things actually happen.
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, now gone, he came to the Pentagon with some ideas about change, certainly in the military view, radical change in some ways.
I think in large part he was on the right track. An enormous constraint was imposed from the outset on Rumsfeld, and that was his inability to fire generals. It was made very clear from the White House that he could not replace general officers. And one of the things that Rumsfeld privately did understand, you don't change institutions and culture unless you change people.
The way it's been put to me by some military people, listen, U.S. military doctrine, at least since the time of General Grant and General Sherman, is that you need overwhelming force at point of attack. And that remains military doctrine, and that overall in the main it has served us well. We need big combat units.
I absolutely fundamentally disagree with that assumption, because once again that goes back to three very unique events in the history of the United States: the Civil War, World War I, and World War II, where we mobilized millions of citizen soldiers for a very narrow and specific purpose. General Grant says in his memoirs that we fought the war the way we had to because we had to crush the South with numbers and materiel. It was the only way we could fight because he did not have competent commanders. He did not have trained formations. We did the same thing in World War I, and ultimately we did the same thing in World War II. And after each war, we returned to the status quo of maintaining a small, innocuous volunteer army that truly was not professional, that was largely treated to abject neglect, while we focused our attentions on the Navy and the Air Force. My point is, we don't need millions of men under arms, but we do need a very competent, standing professional force that is more teeth than tail and overhead, that is designed for the kinds of limited operations that we must undertake in expeditionary warfare.
Colonel Douglas McGregor. And when we return, the so-called front lines of the global war on terror. That's next. Tonight we've looked at the U.S. military in transition toward lower intensity combat and so-called stability operations. At Dan Rather Reports, we've been following these changes from the nation's most prestigious military academy to Iraq, to Africa. Watching these scenes of America's new way of war back to back drives home how quickly these changes are coming and just how profound they are. We start at the United States Military Academy at West Point, on the banks of the Hudson River. It is here that generations of future generals learned the art of war.
Left turn, march!
Both of the Army officers we sat down with for this program went here. And many graduates have been called upon to win wars and occupy territory. General Ulysses S. Grant, class of 1843, occupied the defeated rebel South. General Douglas MacArthur, class of 1903, occupied Japan after World War II. And most recently, General David Petraeus, class of 1974, is currently in charge of operations in Iraq. Each called upon the honor and education they learned at West Point. Established by Thomas Jefferson in 1802, it is the oldest military academy in the United States, but it's at the vanguard of the Army's new way of thinking.
It's customary law, sir, so it applies no matter what.
Over the course of the summer, we take a lot of cadets and send them to various places around the world.
The man responsible for the training of the next generation of Army leaders is Brigadier General Patrick Finnegan.
We've seen that in Iraq and Afghanistan, that the application of force is not necessarily the only thing that is going to win these battles and these wars that we're fighting. If we're not available, if our officers are not ready to understand other cultures, to deal with them, to deal with the people, we can win battles and we can kill people, but that is not going to secure America's place in the world, and it's not going to secure our liberty.
Well, you spent nearly all of your adult life in the Army, and you know an argument that goes along the lines, no, I want my military people trained to kill people and break things, and if you need to, quote, nation build, that should be somebody else's job.
And, sir, I agree with that. I agree that generally that's the role of the armed forces, is to apply force. But it's clear that in the wars that we're fighting now, and in the wars that we're likely to fight in the future, that's not going to be enough. We have to deal with the people who are there. We're not going to have another army lined up across the field against us. This is not the Napoleonic Wars where we simply shoot at their army and they shoot at us. We have to fight this war. I mean, the cliche, of course, is winning hearts and minds, but that's what we have to do. We have to have soldiers who are prepared to apply force when it's necessary, and also to know when that is counterproductive to do, and when they instead need to befriend the people so that they get the information they need about the enemy, so they can apply force when they need to.
We traveled to Iraq during the surge and saw what this theory looks like in practice.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Befriending locals to get information has become a common tactic. We saw Americans meeting with sheiks over lunch to gather crucial intelligence.
No, I do want another one. All we need is just for your men and your whole tribe to look out for any movement that's strange, especially, as I said, in the recent days we've had a lot of reports on the soldiers of heaven coming into this province. So if they can be on the lookout for large groups of men moving.
That interaction was typical of the 3 weeks we spent in southern Iraq with United States Marine Captain Ann Gilroy. She was running stability operations in that Shia-dominated region, and she thinks the violence against U.S. troops is due more to poverty than to ideology.
I really believe a lot of these guys, it's not their choice to plant an IED, but because the unemployment's hovering probably around 85% down here, and the situation's just been really difficult here for a long time. I mean, the Shia were really persecuted under Saddam, so this hasn't just been 4 years of difficulty for them, it's been decades.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 7,000?
Part of the Army's solution is what critics call peace for cash programs. Captain Gilroy showed us those, too.
We basically decided that the people who care most about their security and safety are the people who live in that very house on that very block. We devised a system whereby we would give a standard amount of money per kilometer that was guarded of territory. So every tribe gets the same amount of money per kilometer. Then it's up to them how many people they want to hire to cover that distance.
Not to mention the hearts and minds operations that build the trust necessary to secure cooperation from a battle-scarred population. These operations come in the form of rebuilding a city, opening a school.
We call these Mary Janes in the States.
And handing out shoes to children. Captain Gilroy thinks the military's new approach will be important in the battles ahead.
It's also really about building relationships. So we have to give the sheikh a reason to work with us.
The United States military is taking up these new responsibilities not only in Iraq and Afghanistan, but all around the globe. Here, Army soldiers train local troops in Uganda, America's most important ally in Central Africa.
If you mess up one part, they're going to make you do that one part over again. I don't expect you guys to mess up.
Staff Sergeant Michael Ryan is one of the trainers.
We're not doing war back like in the